Hi there and welcome to the video for preparing for Java programming. There are a few steps we need to carry out before we write our first Java program. I have narrowed those down to 4 steps. The 4 steps are as follows. The first step is something called installing a piece of software called the JDK. We next install a piece of software called Eclipse, which is quite simply for writing our code. This is something called an IDE, which stands for Integrated Development Environment, and this is what we use to code for Java. Our next step is where we have to set up Eclipse. When you first run Eclipse, it can be a small bit daunting. There's a lot of options, there's a lot of something called views. So we're going to make sure that when I open my Eclipse, it's going to look exactly the same as your Eclipse. Also, we want to make sure that it uses what is called the correct JDK, which we just have installed. We next need to make sure that everything is installed correctly. The easiest way to do that is if we create a brand new Java project, and we will also create a second Java project. So to explain the first step in more detail, first thing we need to install something called a JDK. Now JDK is quite simply software that enables us to write Java code. Now the likelihood is you already have a JDK on your machine, so we're going to make sure that we're going to be using version 14 or later. We download this JDK from the Oracle SE downloads page, which will be shown later on in the video. The next step we need to do is just quite simply install it. We then need to check if we have other versions of the JDK in our machine. Now this is very important for later on steps when we're configuring Eclipse. There is a high likelihood that you will already have other versions of the JDK, so we also want to ensure that we are all using the same JDK, which is going to be JDK 14, and that is what our Eclipse is going to be using. So we're next going to install Eclipse, which is something called our Integrated Development Environment. It's an IDE. It's quite simply what we use to write our Java code. Nothing more complicated than that. So we quite simply go to the Eclipse downloads page. We download it to our wherever it is on our folder. Then we unzip it. We don't have to install it. We just unzip it, which is very convenient. Our next step is we create a folder where all our Java code is going to be saved. We then quite simply run Eclipse. Now the first time we run Eclipse, we have to put in all the different options we're going to use with Eclipse. Okay, so we have to set it up. We need to specify what folder we're going to use to save our code. We should have already created this folder. We then need to configure how Eclipse looks to you. Alright, so I want to ensure that the view I have of my Eclipse is going to look exactly the same as the view you will have on your machine. This is to avoid any confusion in the lessons and also to make it easier for you. We next want to ensure that Eclipse is using the correct JDK. We want it to use JDK 14 or later, which you should have installed in the previous steps. With all this complete, it is a simple process then to create our first Java project to test our settings. So we'll create our first Java project, which is going to be a small bit more involved. And then we will show you how to create a second Java project, which is the process we'll use for creating Java projects henceforth. Now onto a video on how to do all this. The first thing we need to do is to download a JDK for Java. Alright, explain what a JDK is. So we just go to Google and we type up Java SE download. SE stands for Standard Edition, which is what we're going to be using. Now this brings us to the Oracle Java website. Alright, now because it's Oracle that managed Java. So we go to this site and we can see it here. Here's our link, Java SE downloads. Quite simply click on this link and it'll bring us to the Java SE downloads page. Now there is many different versions of JDKs. Alright, the one we're going to be using is Java SE 14. We can see this Java SE 11. We could use any format after Java SE 9, but I want everyone to be using the same JDK. So we're going to be doing Java SE 14. And so at this point then, we quite simply click on JDK download, which we can see here. We click on that, brings up with all this usual stuff, and we scroll down the screen. Now the one we want to use here is the Windows x64 installer. So we click on that one there. We have our various details. Click on download JDK 14.2. If we go down here to the bottom left hand screen, we can see it downloading. Alright, so now it's downloaded. So I am now going to go to my downloads folder and we can see it here. Now we want to install the JDK. You might already have a JDK installed actually, but we're going to install this one. Double click on it. You can see it here. I then click on, it's very simple, click on next, and it will be installed to this location here. Now this is C Program Files Java, it might be different on yours, don't change this location. Alright, then I click on next. This will now install the Java JDK. It's a very simple process, it's installing it to a particular location where we've seen already. Now we're not going to click on next steps. If we click on next steps, this is going to bring us to these documents called API documentation and developer guides. Now these are Oracle guides. Oracle guides are very, very technical. And unless you're very, very familiar with Java, I would not recommend you to click on next steps. All right. So we're just going to click on close. So our JDK is now installed. Now the next step we're going to do is we're going to check is there any other JDKs on our machine. All right. So we go to Program Files. We go to Java because that's where our JDKs are going to be installed. Now I'm just going to make this a bit bigger so we can see our folders. When we do that, we can see that I have 3 JDKs. There is JDK 1.8, which is Java 8. There is JDK 11. There is JDK 14. So we have Java 8, Java 11, and Java 14. 11 has more advanced features than 8. 14 has more advanced features than 11. Okay, the one we're going to be using is JDK 14. Now, the next step we're going to do is we are going to download software that will enable us to write Java code, which is going to use JDK 14.0.2. All right. Now, the software we are going to be using is called Eclipse. Eclipse is something called an IDE, which stands for Integrated Development Environment. Now you can actually, so just type in here in Google Eclipse downloads, you could actually write Java code on something like Notepad or WordPad, but Eclipse just makes it handier to write your code. So I click on here, Eclipse downloads. This software is all free. Now there's a number of places you can download it, but I prefer you to click on these particular links. So we click on Download Packages. So we click on that link. Now this will bring us to the different versions of Eclipse. All right, Eclipse, you can use Eclipse for developing all sorts of software. The one we're going to be using is Eclipse IDE for Java developers. It's neat and it's tidy. There is Eclipse IDE for Java developers. There's additional tools which we don't want at this moment in time. So Eclipse IDE for Java developers, and we click on this link here for Windows. You see for Mac and for Linux. So I'm just showing you the guide for Windows. Click on that. Then we can see here, I click on the download link. It's the Czech Republic. Doesn't matter where it's coming from. Just click on that. So we can see here Eclipse is downloading. All right. Now, the beauty of Eclipse is just a file that's on your machine. You don't have to install it. So you can have multiple versions of Eclipse on the one machine. It's not like Word where you can just have one Word application. You can have multiple versions of Eclipse. So this is just a basic IDE for Java. You can see it's downloaded here to the downloads folder, and it's a zipped file. Now all you have to do to install Java is you just have to install Eclipse is to unzip this folder. The easiest way to unzip this folder is if quite simply double click on the folder. All right, and it brings us to here, and we can see there's a folder inside the zipped folder, and all you have to do is quite simply drag it out. So I'm going to drag it out to my desktop. So that is where my Eclipse folder, my Eclipse application is going to be. Now I've speeded things up here a small bit. It might take a couple of minutes for it to unzip. all right, because there's various files in it that might be considered to be suspicious, but they're not suspicious. Okay, it's just your virus scanners checking things. So it might take longer than it's taking there. It might take a couple of minutes to unzip Eclipse. So we next create a folder into which we're going to save all of our Java code. Now this is called a workspace. So I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to call it my workspace. We can call it anything I want, but I'm going to call it my workspace. This is where all our Java code is going to be stored, the Java code we're going to be writing. So we have our workspace there created. Next thing, so we go to our Eclipse folder. We're going to double click on this exe here that's going to launch our Eclipse application. So we double click on it and our Eclipse splash screen comes up. This is our Eclipse splash screen. We next have to tell Eclipse where our workspace is. So we do this by going to browse, okay, and we browse to the folder we're just after creating. The folder we're just after creating is called my workspace. You can see here, click on select folder. So now we have the correct workspace selected for our Eclipse. We click on launch. So now this is going to launch the Eclipse properly with the proper workspace. The workspace that we've created is what Eclipse is going to use now when we write our Java code. All right. The first time we launch Eclipse, it will look like this. However, this is not the screen we're going to be using. So we have to change how Eclipse looks every time we launch it. All right. So in order to do that, there is a step, one or two steps that we have to do. So we go to the top left-hand corner of the screen and we see this little icon. This will change it to the layout we'll use for writing our code. We click on it and it changes this sort of screen. All right. Now we just get rid of one or two screens to make our screen more easy to manage. We are going to be creating Java projects. And the very first time we created a Java project, we used this link up here. Now this is different from every other time we're creating a Java project. But here we just click on this link here. So we create a Java project. So the first thing we need to do is we need to give our project a name. So we're going to give this project a name of test. And we only have to carry out this next step if this guy here does not say Java SE 14. All right. Now it says Java SE 1.8. So we need to change that. So what do? I click on configure JRE. It brings us to this screen. So we want to change this from 1.8 to 14. So how we do that is we click on add here and we're going to go to the folder where we have the JDK 14. Okay, so I just click on standard VM, click on next, then I go to the directory, and what I do then is I browse to where we have our JDKs installed, which is in program files, see, program files, Java. So go to Java here. So then we click on JDK 14. We clicked on select folder. Everything is fine. Just leave it the way it is. Now we want to use 14 as our default. So what we need to do, we need to click on that and make it the default. So then we just click on it. And then we click on apply and close. All right. So now we still need to tell Eclipse for this particular project we're going to use Java 14. So what we need to do, and we need to click on this link here. Now it causes this error to appear. We just need to change another setting from 1.8 to 14. So we click on configure. It brings us to this screen here. We go up to the drop down box, go down to 14. Then we click on apply and close, which brings us back to this screen here. We now click on finish. This brings us to something called a module creation page. We don't want to create modules. We will be doing them later on in the course. So we'll quite simply click on don't create. So now we have our Java project created. We want to create something called a package inside it. So we right click on our Java project test, right click, we go to new, we go to package. Now a package is something like a folder, but we need to create them for each Java project we have. Okay, so the naming structure is like this. You go com.android. That is going to be the name of our package. We click on finish. So we can see now we have our Java package here. Now we can see our JDK, which is 14 up here, and we can also see our package. Now inside our package is where we're going to place something called a class file. A class file is the file we're going to be typing our Java code into. So we right click on our package, we go to new, we go down to class. We're going to give our class a name. We're going to call our class main. We click on the little public static void main. Now, we don't have to click on any other buttons to create our class. All right? All we have to do is give it a name, and all we have to do is click on public static void main. The next thing we have to do then is we just click on the finish button. So now our class is created. We'll click on the finish button, and our class looks like this. All right? So we'll just make it a bit bigger so we can see what we're talking about. All right, now this is where we will be typing up all of our code. Now here we have our main class, and inside that we have something called main method. Now all of our code is going to be typed inside the main method for the first couple of weeks. All right, that is all code between these opening and closing curly brackets. So our first code is going to be a little print statement. So I go system dot out, type out exactly as you see on the screen, dot println. Okay, then we do opening and closing braces. Now we're going to be putting in some text inside this print statement. It goes inside the braces, and it's going to be surrounded by double quotation marks. It will then be printed out to the screen. I'll show you what I mean. Now, so what we're going to put in here, we're going to put in double quotation marks. And we're going to put in the print statement, hello world. All right. Do the same on the next line. And I'm going to print out a second line. This is our first program. So we now want to run our code. So how we run our code is we just go up the top of the screen here. We click on this little run icon here. Runs. Now you can see it prints off here. This is where everything's going to be printed off from now on. Hello world. This is our first program. We're now going to create another project to show you how easy it is to create a project from this point onwards. So we go to File, we go to New. Now we scroll up and you'll see Java Project. Click on Java Project. I'm going to give it a name. Okay, I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to give it a name of Test2. The only setting we have to make sure we have clicked is Use Default JRE JDK 14.0.2. So click on that guy. And then we click on Finish. And again, don't create a module. Then we right click on Test2, New, Package. We're going to call it com.android. Click on Finish. Then New, Class. And I'm going to call it Main. It's inside Test2. Click on Finish. And that is our second program finished. I don't have a main method, so I physically type in the main method this time, public static void main string args. You become very familiar with this, and it's inside the curly brackets after this guy. To finish it off here, inside the curly brackets is where you'll put in your code. And that finishes our video of how to set up your PC for writing Java.